All right. Welcome in, everybody. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and this is the first episode of LunchLeads Live. I'm Gil Mayron, founder of LunchLeads. We host private executive lunch and learns around the country, and starting today, we're going to broadcast them live, so you get to see expert knowledge that you won't find anywhere else in an uninterrupted format. So today's a pure live stream, no lunch. So lunch is on you. The next 3 shows we're buying, and I'll let you know at the end as to what they are. 2 things: drop your questions in the comments anytime. We'll get to them after the presentation, and we'll put a link in the chat to where you could book a private one-on-one meeting with today's expert. Speaking of, today's expert is Scott Alldridge, President and CEO of IP Services. He has 20 plus years on the exact layer insurers investigate when they decide whether your claim pays. So with that, Scott, the floor is yours.
We're happy to be here today, Gil. Excited to share a little bit on a topic that I think is, quite frankly, top of mind. If it's not, it should be. And hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll get a sense about how important this particular topic is. And that is if you, in fact, do even have cybersecurity insurance. I know some organizations don't even necessarily have that, and we've ran into that, and that's a very unfortunate situation. But if you, in fact, do have insurance and particularly cybersecurity coverage in the unthinkable time of a breach or ransomware or whatever, and of course we know with all the AI threats out there that we all read about and see today that that's a very real and pressing issue. Extremely relevant. We don't have to sit here and create any fear, uncertainty, and doubt around cybersecurity because you just have to read the news, and you'll see what's going on out there. It's not good, quite frankly. The bad guys are kind of catching up, if you will. I'll start with a little bit of a story, right? A healthcare clinic that they thought they were covered, but they got the inevitable. Somebody clicked on something, they infiltrated the network, the threat actors took over, and they shut her down. Actually for 12 days. And they thought, well, at least worst case, we're going to have good cybersecurity coverage because they had renewed recently their cyber coverage. And they thought for sure that they were going to at least have a good backstop financially there. But come to find out, the claim was denied. And in fact, a lot of claims are being denied. And 24 more claims in 2024, 2005, even additional claims are being up to almost 40% of claims being denied. And of course, they were missing MFA. They thought it was everywhere. They didn't have proof that they were doing regular backups. They had no governance oversight evidence that that the management teams or the executives or the board really cared about the cyber program in any level of detail. Leave that to the IT guys, leave that to the cyber guys. And of course, now all cybersecurity insurance in the fine print is turning towards evidence-based insurance, meaning that you have to prove and attest that you've got these particular controls, the fine print, if you will, of systems going on that it's calling out, of cybersecurity controls and protection in place. So again, I just start with another story. Stories kind of tell the picture. We may have all heard about 3 years ago, the MGM big casino resort, right? Billions of dollars of corporation. They have all the best and brightest security operation teams, cybersecurity experts, etc. But yet one phone call actually cost them over $100 million. And that just shows how important the social aspects, the people aspects of an organization is. Let me tell you how it happened. They basically, a threat actor was perusing the LinkedIn, found an email address from a network administrator that worked for the MGM, used the information he was able to garner from the web and from the email address, called into the help desk center of MGM's IT group, and convinced them to reset a password. With that email address and reset that he had siphoned, he was able to then garner access inside the network. Sat there for a while, looked around, realized he could go, as we call it, east to west, deeper into the network systems, invited some of very popular and well-trained ransomware franchises, believe it, they kind of work in franchise groups, and they began to basically ransomware the complete network, bringing down about 80% of the casino systems. Then about 24 days, they were down. Cost them $100 million by estimations. And then interestingly enough, a few months later, about a year later, they settled on a class action suit for another $40+ million. So it really boils down. One phone call could cost an organization $140+ million. Is kind of crazy to think about, let alone the small business that everybody thinks no longer is interesting or we're not big enough. Security by obscurity. Not true. We've worked with organizations that aren't even $500,000-$600,000 in top revenue, not even $1 million in top line revenue, and they still have suffered breaches, various extortion attempts, different types. No business is too small. And the reality is, as you look on the dark web, and I've been out there a few times, it's a very isolated thing. Never want to go on the dark web, special browsers you use. You will see these franchises pop up. Join our franchise ransomware for $495 today, and we'll give you a set of tools to hack Wi-Fi or break in. By the way, you can escalate with our expert ransomware team, and they'll bring in a really expert ransomware, and then they'll share the profits of the Bitcoin. They want cryptocurrency because they want to make sure that it's non-traceable when they get paid. They'll share those profits with you. So if there's some nefarious person out there, even a high schooler that loves tech but wants to be naughty, would have the opportunity to join a ransomware franchise for $495 and make a lot of money. They treat it like a real business and a real franchise. Scary world. As Gil shared, I'm Scott Alldridge, I'm the CEO, President of IP Services. I've had the privilege over the last almost 30 years of working with organizations, and we've been involved in thought leadership. One of the organizations I'm involved with is called the IT Process Institute. We've actually delivered a variety of different thought leadership books over the years. Way back in the 2004, 5, 6 time frame was our first book, the original VisibleOps book, and then wrote a series of books over the next several years. And then here about 3 years ago, kind of moved away from, one of the books was VisibleOps Security. We didn't call it Cybersecurity. I released the book that you're seeing now, that's the VisibleOps Cybersecurity book, and wrote it and released it here a couple of years ago, and excited that it became an Amazon bestseller. In addition to that, I was able to write the VisibleOps AI, which really is around governance of AI, because we all hear about AI usage. We're using different types of generative AI. Now we're hearing about agentic or agent-based AI, but there's a lack of controls and governance. That opens up huge threats to your organization, and that's a different topic for a different day. But that book, we're excited, recently became an Amazon bestseller as well. And then I just released the VisibleOps, The Anatomy of Cybersecurity Breaches, where I kind of go into situations and examples just like the MGM and break it down and say, if these organizations would have had, companies would have had these basic sets of controls in place, they could have prevented some very massive breaches. So just a little bit about me in the thought leadership space and what we do. I have an MBA in cybersecurity and certified on all kinds of different things, from technical to a certified chief information security officer. So I live in this space. I do a lot of virtual CISO work for organizations and companies, and our company delivers managed security, cybersecurity services for organizations. So that's me in a nutshell. But today is really about kind of raising the tide that floats the boats around all of the organizations and companies out there that have insurance, and they're assuming that their cybersecurity insurance would pay, and understanding what it takes for them to pay these days, because they're getting smarter, as I shared earlier. So it's changed, right? Policies are very conditional. Investigations are forensic. They're going deep and finding out, what proof do you have? Attestation, as we say, of controls, proving you have it. And it has to be ongoing evidence. It can't be one time we did a great set of policies in a nice binder that's on the shelf. That's not going to make an insurance company have to pay your claim. Operational maturity is now audited after a breach. They're looking at all of the systems and the evidence to make sure that you were doing all the good things. And at one level, well, we understand how insurance companies are in the business to make a lot of money, and they do, and it's frustrating sometimes, and I won't get into that. We also can recognize that organizations that are negligent, really, and not really caring about their cybersecurity practices and protecting their organization and their data and their systems, they're cavalier, and they aren't doing that. And so why would a cybersecurity insurance company pay if we're being grossly negligent and not really putting good practices into place to protect our systems? So there's a common sense element to that as well. Again, I've shared, as the opening in the title of this, right, 30 to 40% of cyber incidents and claims are being denied, they're being rejected. That most of them come from criminal outside activity. They're not insider threats like they used to be the big threat. It used to be more inside, but the network has changed. Talk about that a little bit later. But there are missing systems. Managed detection and response, EDR, MDR. Threat actors don't sleep. You really should have monitoring systems in that you can prove evidence on, that's monitoring 24/7. Because in the middle of the night, when we're all sleeping, they're still going after scanning networks, finding ways to brute force into breach something. So insurance are really verifying all these controls And you have to be able to prove it. You got to have documentation, reporting, or they're not going to pay the claim or reduce the payout for the claim. I have the sources here at the bottom of this particular slide about the claims not being paid. It's becoming a real risk. It's a real issue, right? The breach is denied coverage. If the big thing is the cost isn't necessarily paying the threat actors. Often we focus on that, right? Pay me 50 Bitcoin or whatever. Often it's the operational paralysis. The fact that your organization these days, most organizations, no matter what industry, even, highly manual organizations still rely on their computer systems and their, technical, capabilities, really is a differentiator in your ability to use technology. So it fits and hits almost all industries. And coming to a halt, seizing operations, much like the MGM, you can see that that's a very expensive endeavor. And then if you do get breached, right, and data is exfiltrated, you've got legal issues, you've got issues potentially around your investors or your board. It's a PR nightmare. And one of the biggest things is your loss of client confidence, right? Clients aren't really, feeling like their information is being protected. And we've all gotten the letters in the mail, right, your information's been breached, this and that and the other. So likely a lot of information is already on the dark web, right? But that doesn't negate the fact that that data that these threat actors can get is very valuable in the dark web. They can sell it for hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the type of data it is, let alone very specific data, right? Social security numbers or even credit card numbers, et cetera. So your business survivability is really at stake when you get right down to it. In fact, recent studies from the Verizon report, about 40% of companies that suffer a major, attack and breach will go out of business within a year. It's that serious, particularly small businesses. So what are the fundamentals of IT security? That's the funny thing. A lot of times we think it's some fancy, we hear about the AI and it's got to be all these very sophisticated systems and cybersecurity practices and tooling, but that's not necessarily the case. The reality is that there are just some basic fundamentals, right? IT processes, they actually really matter. Practical things like, do you actually talk about changes or does somebody just go make changes ad hoc? Do we have a process around it? Are we thinking about what could this change break, or could it make a system not available, or could it open up a weakness that a threat actor could come through, a vulnerability? So, or we have systems that just aren't patched. They haven't patched the switches or the firewalls or the servers, right? We've all known about the Microsoft releases of our workstations where there are kind of 0-day releases or patches where they've realized there's a vulnerability that the threat actors can so easily garner access. Are we patching those? Do we recognize them? Are we listening for those and looking for those 0-day patches? Really important. And is it kind of the business saying that's an IT problem, or the executives or leadership? That's very common. We run into that. There's kind of this, if you will, chasm between IT and executive or the management of the board. And the truth is there can't be. It's no longer an IT issue. It really is a business issue. It's an executive and a governance issue. So you need to be able to make sure that your teams or your provider or your consultant is giving you the ongoing evidence, the reporting that these things are actually being done. These security practices are in place. And then we think about one of the first principles of really zero trust, which is a methodology we believe in, layers of cybersecurity. It deals with pillars, but there's a principle before we get to all those layers that you need to have in place, or at least the basic layers you should have in place, the fundamental layers, is assume breach. Let's just assume that tomorrow we come into work that we've got the black screen and the text message that tells us to transfer 35 Bitcoin to somebody. And the reality is that as we assume breach, we could often say we're not going to pay because we already know that we have backups that are not only tested, but they're immutable and air gapped. What do I mean by that? Immutable means that they're completely protected and untouchable by your existing network. Once they're scanned for malware and ransomware, they're set completely apart and aside and cannot be reached. Because one of the more common things you'll see with threat actors is once they breach a network, they're patient. They'll wait 30, 60, 180 days. They'll see where your backups. A lot of organizations, we're backing up to another site, another facility. We're backing up to the cloud, so we're good. They don't understand that unless they're immutable and fully encrypted and air gap, you still are vulnerable. Those threat actors will see where that's going, and then they'll encrypt your backups to your backups as well. Very common. So that's a really important, this assume breach, really knowing what's our instant response plan if we get breached. What are we going to do? Who's in charge? Who's responsible for what? And where are we going to restore those systems? Do we have another cloud provider? Do we have another partner? Do we have a backup set of servers? How fast can we do it? We call RPO and RTO, recovery point objective. At what point in time do we want to recover to? how long is it going to take us to get that recovered? Can we survive 4 hours of downtime, 8 hours of downtime? Can we be down for 24, 48 hours? In some cases, under an incident plan, that's acceptable as compared to paying all the money for the threat actors. But you also could have interrupted operations, and you need to think about that. So again, backups are really huge. One thing you could take away from the presentation today, it would be really understanding all of the details and the layers and the strategy and the technology around your backups to make sure it really truly is immutable and air gapped, scan for ransomware and malware, really important. And then of course, do we test our systems basic, often we call penetration testing or vulnerability scanning to know that we have vulnerable holes or misconfigurations that the threat actors can use to garner access. Really important. And then do we have that evidence, that ongoing ability to attest that we're doing some of the basic things that we know, the fundamental things to protect our system, so there's no negligence being happening and that it's really being followed and cared for. That's really important. So again, I talked a little bit about this already, but companies need to assume breach, right? The first principle. Attackers will exploit assumptions. You assume IT has that taken care of. We assume that our backups are in the cloud, so they're okay. Visibility beats the assumptions. And in the VisibleOps series of books that I have written, this is really a lot of what we get down to is really fundamentals, right? Things like the change. And when the original book was released, the VisibleOps book, we based it on the fact that there were lots of studies, and I've seen recent ones, that 70 to 80% of all IT failure, lack of downtime, lack of availability, is correlated to some unapproved, unauthorized, untested change. So the working thesis of that book that we wrote around using some best practices from the IT infrastructure library and other proven bodies of best practices in IT service management is that we manage change really well. We're going to knock a home run out of our availability. So that's really important. Do we have a forward schedule of change? Do we test the change? Do we have rollback for the change? I could go on and on about all the practices, but you can't do good change management if you don't know what your configurations are. This is really common sense. If we know that I have a well-working, secure, known configuration that's on an application or a server, and we have to introduce change and upgrade and update, even as simple as that, we move from one secure, well-known state to the next by following good IT processes. It's not as difficult as it sounds. Here's the quip, though. In my new book, the VisibleOps Cybersecurity book, no security breach ever happens without a change or a need for a change. It's a bit of a riddle, but think about it. Either I'm going to brute force, if you will, into something, hack a password, however I do that, or I'm going to socially engineer somebody, phish phiz, whatever we do to garner access to a system. Either way, something has to change for the threat actor to garner access into the system. So the truth around IT processes still matter. Change management still matters because a change has to take effect for the threat actor to do whatever the bad things threat actors do. So that's really important to understand. Super foundational thing. These basic discipline areas are really important to repeatable processes. And the reality is that if you have chaos in your organization, right? If you have no discipline, you can't use these things. Chaos really is where the attackers exploit, where things aren't covered. We didn't patch our systems this week or this month. We didn't know, right? These are the things that get you in trouble. It's not what you know, it's what you don't know. So what will these insurance underwriters really care about, right? They're going to know, were the executives involved in the secure cybersecurity practices? Did they know what they were? Were they asking the right questions? Do they know how to ask the right questions? Are they doing some basic training to ask the right questions? These are important, and it keeps everybody accountable, and it helps protect the organization. Evidence. What evidence do we have that we're doing these things? Do we have reporting that our backups were actually completed and they ran some automated testing so we know it's a valid backup? And then we actually go through a tabletop exercise or actually a business resilience exercise where we actually test the recovery of our backups on those systems. That should be done on a semi-regular basis. And again, visibility and accountability, right? Who's making sure these things are being done? I's are being dotted, T's are being crossed. It's not as hard as it sounds if you're using the right systems, the right processes, and the right partners and tooling. So let's talk just about something like MFA. We've all heard about multi-factor authentication, right? And that's a really interesting one because the MFA, which a lot of systems and organizations and companies don't even have basic MFA turned on. But there are really multiple types of MFA. But right now, the standard MFA, where we get, a code from an email source or maybe a text via SMS, That's called centralized multi-factor authentication, where one source is sending us a code. The problem with that is that the threat actors now can hijack SMS streams. Sometimes they'll do that first. They'll hijack an email or set a relay up so you don't even know that your emails are being forwarded. And so they can easily garner access to those MFA codes that are being sent. That single authentication is not really great MFA. What we're looking for is verified credential access, or advanced MFA, as I like to refer to it as. This is where we have decentralized authentication. So maybe some of you do use a lot of apps, Amazon, Microsoft. You can download an authenticator app on a mobile device. Now you can actually share a code or basically enter something to authenticate you with that advanced feature. Now a crypto key is on your phone in the authenticator, and it's being shared with the central authentication point. They're constantly communicating with each other, knowing that you are truly the verified person that's accessing that information, because we've decentralized the authentication. This is advanced MFA, and it's really becoming important because the threat actors are learning how to steal the other MFA. Again, can we prove that we're patching our systems? Do we document what we've done? Do we have a patch management system at all? Who has admin access? Does all the IT team or even executives have administrative access to network devices and servers and all the systems? Really important. We call it role-based access controls, RBAC. It's very important that you have some of those basic fundamental things in place. And then again, backups truly being recoverable. I think I hit that pretty hard. So there's an illusion out there sometimes that a lot of times the questionnaire will come in, it gets thrown to the IT guy, he goes down, check, check, check. There might be a few missing things. Often policy will get created or even a standard operating procedure, but there's no real evidence that's being created. So the box gets checked, but that's going to come back later to bite, because validation matters more than your intention. Or sometimes, oh, we're going to deploy that this year, check the box, but you haven't, or it's not been budgeted, or the business is fighting it because they don't want to spend another dime on IT spend or cybersecurity spend. And that's a problem sometimes, because there really is a huge threat, and truly there are surveys around budgets that really are not allocating the right amount of budget to make sure their systems are secure and safe, because the impact's huge. It could cost your whole business. So this is really huge. So if I was going to give you just a list of 8 controls, and this is not complete by any means, but we sometimes look to the CIS, Center for Internet Security, which is a standard across the world for configurations and standard cybersecurity practices, called the CIS. Happy to Google it. Matter of fact, Tony Sagar is a friend. He was one of the persons that wrote a review of my book that's included in my VisibleOps book at CIS. They have the top 18 controls, but I boiled it down to just 8 of these controls that really could significantly increase and help your cybersecurity posture. And here's the list. You can read them with me. MFA, again, advanced MFA, if you can go to that level, certainly MFA. Security awareness training. You may be doing this. It's usually not regular enough as it should be. There's great automation around SAT, as we call it, where often your teams can take a quick little quiz, a learning exam, and learn what not to do in the way of their cyber practices and awareness of being phished or phised. Really important. That's on a regular basis. Really, those should be going out once a month, even bi-weekly. It's not a once a year or twice a year thing. Matter of fact, even from an executive side, there's a case study from one CEO on a fairly large company that decided he was going to write a cybersecurity corner in his newsletter that went out once a month to his teams. And just because of that awareness, and with his managers, they actually cut down their phishing attempts on their testing by 70%, just because the executives were making a point and making it a value for the organization to think about cyber safety. Again, patch management governance. Do you have a system and a process and tooling for that? Backups, I've hit on that. Mutable backups. This is a big one. Identity and access management, right? Using a corporate password manager is really a best practice, where it's using strong passwords. You can have a private one for those apps you need to access. You can have a corporate one where certain groups within your organization or role-based access can be applied to get at stuff. Are you monitoring security 24/7? Do you have an XDR, managed detection and response, as we call it? These specific tools that are looking across your network, your systems, your workstations, to make sure that threat actors and things aren't happening, breaches aren't happening. It'll shut them down with automation. Those are about 70%, 80% successful from the breach not being able to spread and isolating it. A really important factor in controlling the ability for threat actors to actually be successful in their breach. Having really good security monitoring and controls in place. Again, ITDR's identity threat detection, a lot missing. That's on your Office 365 email tenant. Often that one's missing. MDR, managed detection response, all these acronyms. EDR, endpoint detection response, right? Because the end user is the new endpoint. So we think about mobile devices or home VPNs or home access. No longer is the network, in an isolated place at the office, right? People are accessing it from all over in all kinds of different ways. So you got to think about that when we think about our security monitoring. And then instant response. If something does start to happen, something, threat actor or some kind of a malware attack or whatever it might be, denial of service attack, do we in fact have an instant plan on how we respond to that? Who has ownership? How do we do it? What's our plan, our recovery? What are all those pieces in place? Super important. And then lastly, just by your executives caring, right? Your presidents, owners, boards, really making a priority of cybersecurity in the organization. These 8 things can take your posture, cybersecurity posture up, honestly, tenfold. It's that simple, yet really not that hard, really. So cybersecurity is like fire insurance, right? The controls and the conditions. Negligent changes the coverage outcomes. Operational discipline is the survivability. The point being, if we're allowing, crazy practices around things that could ignite flames in our organization and we have no, fire practices and codes, right? We're setting ourselves up for failure. And the same thing's true with cybersecurity inside our organization. It's just kind of that simple, and it's a very applicable example of how cybersecurity is equally important in your organization. So again, as I hit on earlier, downtime often will cost more than ransomware. The operational resilience is really the business issue. How do we get back up? How fast can we get back in business? Can we not pay the threat actors? These are important questions we need to think about. And so some basic questions you can kind of ask your teams, right? This is a takeaway. What systems are critical? Can we prove that our controls are working? Who validates the evidence? Who's looking at it to know that we actually did what we said we did? And how fast can we recover if there's an issue? And this is where a lot of times I go to the build, buy, or borrow. These are tough things, right? We can build a full cybersecurity team. That's expensive. Cyber experts are expensive and often not business critical or a really good business investment, quite frankly. The other thing that we can do is we can, again, that's the build it. The other thing we can do is we can, buy it. But most people, you're a candy company, right? You make really good candy. Do candy really well. You don't need to buy a cyber ops organization or an IT firm. So borrowing it, right? Going to the experts and the teams that really know how to deliver these things are really important. But they have to make sure that they're covering all the right bases and they really understand how to protect your business. And there's a lot of misinformation in that space. There's a lot of general managed services providers that really don't know the depths and the inside ways to really protect businesses from cybersecurity. Their expertise is in desktops and keeping a server and application up, maybe monitoring, but they don't know cybersecurity. And there's a lot of false sense of security with organizations because they think their MSP's got it covered, but they often don't. They're not doing the things that I'm talking about in this presentation. They often aren't providing the full gamut of services that you really need to have in place, and often don't have to be that expensive, just like the top 8, kind of the 8 controls I called out, right? Somebody has to take ownership. And do you know who's taking ownership as an executive? So people, processes, and technology, right? As I referred to earlier, cybersecurity starts with the people. Technology will not compensate for weak processes. If you don't have patching on your system, matter of fact, most systems that suffer a breach, they've found that about 80% were not patched up to the latest patching. Creating a culture that cares about security, that really does matter. And leadership having visibility, this changes the outcome of your overall posture. It is a boardroom conversation these days, right? Certainly an owner executive conversation. Where are we exposed? Do we know? Have we thought about that? Have we discussed that? What assumptions are we making, right? Bob and Mary and IT have got it all covered. And how resilient are we? What's our incident plan? What's our resilience plan? How can we get back up? How much downtime? These questions are often not asked. And then what would deny our insurance claim? Are we not doing things we have to be doing by our insurance? And what would get it denied? These are important questions. Again, most organizations, quite frankly, as we've learned over the years, they're quite overconfident when it comes right down into it. So validation is really, really important. It creates, the visibility creates truth, right? That's the baseline. And truth creates the resilience. That's how you actually can sustain a breach or a threat or an attack. So Standardize your controls, validation, documentation, operationalize your cybersecurity program. These are the things that reduce the complexity. And the final takeaway is that cybersecurity insurance is not a substitute for operational discipline. In other words, a lot of the things that I've talked about around cyber, you really need to invest in, you really need to make a priority of, and you really need to implement, monitor, and maintain and have evidence with, because that's what actually gives your operational discipline. That will get the cyber insurance claim paid if the unthinkable thing does happen. So I talk a little bit about a fool with the tool is still a fool. There's a lot of misinformation out there in our world of acronyms, and I know I've shared some of them today, a lot of geek speak, and that's challenging, to be honest. Like a lot of industries, there's a lot of acronyms and different speak. I think IT and cybersecurity are some of the worst, quite frankly. But the fool with the tool is still a fool concept is that there's a lot of this shiny toy syndrome. There's a lot of vendors and providers, consultants out there really talking, if you get this one thing, that it's really going to make your cybersecurity be really safe and you're going to be protected if you do this one thing. And I would be one takeaway, a big takeaway would be that not any one thing is going to protect your business. It is always layers that you have to put into place. And obviously you can't afford everything. We have budgets, we have constraints, but what are the most important layers? And are you thinking about it in terms of layers? Never one shiny toy solution is going to somehow magically make you safe. You have to basically look at the whole system, all the layers, and they really break down to pillars in our zero trust model. And that's really important. So we don't want to be fooled by all the tool and the shiny stuff that's being sold by vendors and providers out there. So the call to action, what I've said this a few times, what assumptions are we making? What evidence can we produce today? And what would an insurer find after a breach, right? If they're asking those tough questions. One of the things I have, and I'll share with you if you reach out and I'll give you information later, is I have just a simple assessment worksheet. You can see here in this section 1, it's executive visibility. We're asking the executives these basic questions, asking yourself or your teams, right? Do we know our most critical systems? Do we know which systems would stop operations? These kinds of things. So pretty simple to go through, yes, no, and then of course identify the ones that you don't know or you're not sure to make sure you do. Another section pulled out as an example of this survey is, critical vulnerabilities are patched within what timeframes? Do we know? Are we monitoring for those critical vulnerabilities? Can we produce patching reports so we know what was patched or not? What systems are facing the internet and the most threat, the most vulnerable? These are the things we can ask and get way ahead of ourselves by putting solutions in place and making sure our teams are aware. So the overall cybersecurity principle number 1 is trust but verify. We say it a lot. It's an old military term, but how confident are you that your cybersecurity and your IT teams, they really do have your business protected? Most organizations and companies, quite frankly, are not that sure. So one of the things I'm here to offer is, and there's no trick to this, it's no bait and switch or anything, it's simply the truth. We want to raise the tide that floats the boats. We have the ability through a third-party partnership. We can't manage cybersecurity and tell everybody we're doing an amazing job. We use a third party that has a patented process. They will emulate malware, ransomware, different. In the full pen test, they have multiple batteries of different tests to make sure your systems are safe. Penetration testing is basically this idea where you have somebody that's trained, or systems and automation that's trained to try to break into your systems and then show you where your vulnerability and weaknesses are. We're providing a penetration level 1 test. You can go Google it. What would it cost me for my company of 300 people or 100 people or 50 people to get a penetration test? You'll find right there on the web $2,500 to $10,000. There's real value in this. It even looks at AI that might be being used in your systems that could create exposure, as well as several other things, dark web information. The Pen 1 test is very valuable, and it's something that we're offering at no cost, and I'll tell you how to get that down below. Also, we have an insurance readiness assessment that we actually go through. We look at ask the right questions. A lot of what I shared or in the assessment I shared, and it will actually give you a score with the probability of an insurance company paying, and then what areas may be lacking that you need to address, your teams, your consultant, your current provider. Certainly, if there's gaps in any of these things, my team would love to talk to you about it as well. And then lastly, I'm offering up an e-copy of my VisibleOps Executive Edition. It's not the 400-page cybersecurity Amazon bestseller book. I distilled it down, and my guarantee in this is no geek speak. It puts it in practical terms, even business terms. Matter of fact, I shared Deloitte 2 study that says, hey, if you're this size company with this volume and revenue, you should be spending this percentage of your revenue on IT expense. And of that IT expense, you should be spending this amount of percentage as a best practice on your cybersecurity program. If you're out of bounds on that, and it can vary by industry, it's general, but that's really important to know as an executive. Are we investing the right amount of dollars in our IT and our cybersecurity? Really important. So it gives practical examples in there in the executive resource. And I'd be happy to have my team send you a free e-copy of that book. So here's the offer, the penetration level 1 test. Again, reach out, very valuable, certainly no obligation. We're happy to do that and then share a report with you. Insurance readiness assessment, and then the executive resource, the executive companion book, No Geek Speak, gives you really practical insights to cybersecurity. Happy to share that with ECOP. So down below, you'll see the best way to do that is reach out to our VP of Client Solutions, drew.berg@ipservices.com. That's drew.berg@ipservices.com. It's written there on your screen. Or you can text our business text line, which is 541-359-1269. You see that down below. Provide us your name, your phone number, your email address. Give us some basic information. We will reach out. My team will. They'll get you the book. They'll get you signed up for the penetration and the insurance readiness assessment. Happy to provide that for you today. So with that being said, I appreciate your time and listening. Hopefully you're getting some value out of what I shared today. And I would open it up for some questions, actually, at this point in time, if there are any. Gil, I can't hear you. I think you're on pause, silent.
There we go. Can you guys
There we
hear
are.
me now? Okay. So Scott, we have a few questions over here. So let me read it off. And if you can answer, we'll go from there. So question number 1, what are the top 3 reasons cyber insurance claims are being denied today?
Yeah, I think one of the top reasons basically is that we don't have the evidence, and that's one of the first things they're going to ask is show us how and where you were doing these particular things. And I shared that in my presentation is really number 1. The other one is if you don't have evidence, do you even have the right tooling and controls in place, right? And the third one is, does your executive teams or your management team, were they involved in the governance? So what's your oversight program? And were you trying to do your best, right? Because a lot of times you can show good intent, that will pass the muster on an insurance policy. But if you're negligent, you're negligent. So.
Okay, very nice. Next question here. How can organizations ensure they maintain compliance with their cyber insurance policy requirements throughout the policy period, not just at renewal?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reality there is, regular review, right? So you're constantly looking back, and I say constantly, I mean, once a quarter, we have quarterly business reviews, you have quarterly insurance reviews that you would do to make sure that either you're implementing those controls and tools if you haven't already, or that you actually have the evidence in place so that you don't wait till you get to your next renewal or a breach happens and you don't have the places in place. So it's about regularity, it's about executive oversight and making a priority, allocating the proper time and resources to do those reviews. And that's where insurance assessment can also come in to help as well.
All right, let's take one more question. If a mid-sized organization has a limited cybersecurity budget, what are the top 3 security investments that will both reduce cyber risk and maximize the likelihood that a future insurance claim will be paid?
Yep, that's one that there are probably the 3 foundational things because they actually cover multiple controls underneath them. But number 1 is really having MFA deployed everywhere, and ideally advanced MFA, because that's really important. The other one is security awareness training. So your employees are really important. 70% of threats actually start with the end user through email of some sorts. So the first one, MFA for access and identity, making sure you've got good processes in place. Number 2, security awareness training with your people. There's some great solutions around that. And then the third one, and probably in some ways the most important one, is really a managed detection response, a 24/7 security operation monitoring service that's really looking for those threats that are going on. It's actually not as expensive as it sounds, and there's lots of value that's bringing, because again, the threat actors don't sleep. So 3 in the morning when we're all in bed, they're still scanning for vulnerabilities and trying to break into your network. So that 24/7 managed detection response is a really important factor.
All right. Well, that was our last question. Scott Alldridge, IP Services. Everybody, if today raised a doubt about your own coverage, his one-on-one sign-up is in the chat. Also, you can go to lunchleads.com/browse. It's the first event that's up there right now. Go request your one-on-one meeting with Scott. Scott, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So let's well, look at this. I'm still figuring this whole thing out here. Hold on a second here. Okay. So before everybody goes, here's what's coming up in July the 23rd. We're in Dallas with Tom Kirkham of Kirkham Iron Tech. On the 28th, we're in Scottsdale with CISO Global. And on the 30th, we're in Tampa with Data Tech. If you're an executive in one of those cities, there's a seat at the table and lunch is on us. Every broadcast and every registration is at LunchLeads.com. If you're a vendor or a caterer watching, the room, the audience, the leads, the broadcast, we build all of it for you for our sponsor. And if you run a venue or catering company anywhere in the US, we're doing these events multiple times a week. We should talk. Either way, lunchleads.com or email me, Gil, G-I-L, at lunchleads.com. That's the show. The first of many. I'm Gil Mayron. Somebody's buying lunch. It might as well be you. See you in Dallas on the 23rd. Thank you.